Hey kiddos, welcome back. We are going to continue our story of King Cyrus the Great and how his story in the world collided with the Israelites when he sent them back to their home. So if you remember, he made a decree, a very generous and merciful decree, that said that all of the people in his land who were exiled from their homes could return. And this included the Israelites, so they could go worship their God and the true God. So there was a first wave, if you will, a group of people who left first, and they were led by a man named Zerubbabel. Try saying that. It's fun, huh? Zerubbabel. And Zerubbabel, when he returned, thought to himself, what is the most important thing that we can build right now? Any guesses? An altar. The first thing that they built was an altar, and this reminds us of Noah after the flood, or Abraham when he got to his new land. Okay, the first thing they built was an altar, and this was so they could properly worship God and sacrifice to make up for their sins. So they built that altar, and then he thought, well, we shouldn't just have this altar in open space. They used to have a building. It had been destroyed, but they used to have a building where they did their worshiping. And where was that building? Built by Solomon. The temple. So they go back, they rebuild the altar, and then they start rebuilding the temple. And this is what Zerubbabel does with the first group. And then there's a second group, and that group is led by Ezra. And Ezra realizes it's not just about rebuilding a building, it's about reforming their hearts. And so Ezra says, I need to help them understand God more. So they'll change their hearts back to him. And something that had happened in their exile was they didn't know the stories of God. They didn't know the law of God. So this would be like us not hearing Bible stories for so long that our children's children forget them by not even ever hearing them, and we don't tell them. So they didn't know the law of God. So one day Ezra comes out into the square of people and just starts reading the law of God, and they just start crying. They're crying, one, because they haven't heard it and they know it's beautiful and their hearts are saying, yeah, we want it. But also crying because they've sinned and they've done all the opposite things of this. So Ezra was really about reforming their hearts and helping them to start to live the way God had told them again. So you have Zerubbabel building, and then you have Ezra. He comes later and he starts reforming their hearts. And then the final piece is that they're not really working as a group anymore. And so a guy named Nehemiah comes back and he rebuilds the walls around the city so that they're protected and safe and they start to have homes again. And it starts to become their home. So first they worship God, they start changing their hearts back to God, and then they can make that place their own again. And this is kind of how our exiles come back because of King Cyrus and start living in the promised land again. And that will be important because it won't be too terribly long before Jesus can be born in that land that God had given originally to Abraham. So we are going to go ahead and put Zerubbabel into our black books today. So you will want to put a line across the middle, okay? And we will write his name, Zerubbabel. Rebuilt the temple of God, okay? Now, if you want to add in our buddies Ezra reading the law and Nehemiah, you can certainly do that. But I'll just focus on this today, the first part. Zerubbabel rebuilt the temple of God. And in cursive for the first graders, you get to do that fun capital Z. Okay, of God. That has a lot of our letters we need to practice. So there you go. There is Zerubbabel rebuilt the temple of God in cursive. And then I would show not only an altar to start with, because that's the first most important thing they did. So I've got my little altar right there, but then I would show them stacking up to rebuild the walls of the temple. So if you look, if you draw little diagonal lines, so here's one over here. If you draw diagonal lines pointing towards your altar, then you can go ahead and just stack up like you're stacking bricks. Okay, and it looks like you're starting to rebuild that temple. So you're going to want to put little guys there working hard, rebuilding the place that God had given them. Okay, remember, they knew that this place was special, that God had made it for them, given it to them. He had given it to Abraham. So you're going to want to draw a bunch of guys who've come back from exile and are starting to rebuild the temple. And you can certainly have one side higher than the other. Okay. Go ahead and get that temple in there really well. And you want them to rebuild that temple. So it can start to look like Solomon's temple. That's what they were rebuilding. But you want to make sure you have that altar because that was the first most important piece. So remember the steps. It was rebuild the building so we have a place to worship God, reform our hearts so that we're doing it the right way, and then this is a place where we can live. Okay? So that is your story for today of the collision between the secular world and the biblical world. Story of people searching for God and those who already knew about God and how one can affect the other. That's where we're going to wrap up with King Cyrus in our black books for this week before we head back to Greece, because we know he's got a fight with Greece coming. All right.